like everything in life, there is a whole lot that happens behind the scenes that people don't realise. Just like all the athletes are doing with their plans and preparations to go out and compete, we have our plans and processes in place and trust the application of that. I feel like I have an appreciation for it, for the athletes that are there, and I can bring that lens into the work that I'm doing now behind the scenes.
Integrity is at the core of sport. You really have to understand most sports are challenged. We've got a common problem generally, which is that we've got very complex issues, a long list of priorities, and we don't have the resources, to do them all in the time frame we want to do them. There's a big role that we can play in having people out there who are advocates for integrity and who've just, seen enough, I guess, in sport and other walks of life that you can make some of these discussions a bit more real and meaningful.
Welcome to Onside, the official podcast of Sport Integrity Australia. Our mission is to protect the integrity of sport and the health and welfare of those who participate in Australian sport.
Hello, I'm Tim Gavel. Welcome to Sport Integrity Australia's podcast Onside. All eyes are on Paris as the Olympic and Paralympic Games draw closer. Sport Integrity Australia, in partnership with the Australian Olympic Committee and Paralympics Australia, has released an education course covering all the information athletes and support staff need to know. This course will prepare athletes and teams to recognise whereabouts obligations, manage medications and supplements, identify appropriate interactions between adults and young people, how to respond to any approaches to manipulate a competition if they occur, and identify where to report any integrity issues while at the Games. Sport Integrity Australia is also proud to announce the continued support and extension of the National Integrity Manager program for an additional 2 years. Funded by Sport Integrity Australia and administered by the Australian Sports Commission, funds are awarded to eligible sports to support the implementation and work of the National Integrity Managers within sports. Successful sports are eligible for a maximum of $220,000 split over 2 years. Well, what a lineup we have on the show today. Today's guests are champion cyclist Anna Meares, who is Australia's chef de mission for the Paris Olympic Games, and our Advisory Council Chair, Sarah Kenny, herself a former Olympian in the sport of windsurfing. We discuss the importance of embedding integrity into sport, how to create a safe environment for athletes to perform in, and their roles in influencing the sporting landscape. Well, first up, Anna Meares has experienced the highs and lows of an Olympic Games. With 6 medals from 4 Olympic Games, Anna is well placed to mentor and counsel athletes through the good times and the bad. Anna, welcome to Onside. As a former champion cyclist and now in your role as the chef de mission, have you been surprised by the level of activity that goes into making sure that everything goes smoothly for athletes behind the scenes?
I got a bit of an insight to it being the deputy or general manager underneath Petria Thomas leading into the Birmingham Commonwealth Games. So that was a period where I really had my eyes opened. On that trip, I apologised to many of the staff and said thank you, because I had no comprehension of how many people operated behind the scenes that did so much work to impact a smooth experience of a Games. I really loved working behind the scenes with the staff, being a part of a team, really motivated, driven group of people again. And it just reaffirmed for me that I wanted to work in that space. So now having the role of chef de mission, it is, whilst I had some awareness, it is still eye-opening to me, the extent of coverage and areas and the people that it takes to make Games happen.
What is the role of the chef de mission? Could you describe it for us?
Yeah, so it's multifaceted. In a nutshell and simply, that's first part of my role is to build relationships with the sports, the coaches, the athletes, the high performance directors, so that I understand what the nuances of each sport is, what sort of support mechanisms they have in place, what they require for competition to be able to be as smooth as possible. Then I take that information and I work with my team at the AOC to be able to build the environment and nurture the culture for the team put those structures in place for those sports that come in under the umbrella of the Australian Olympic team and support them all the way through games time. And then I have a very much front of house role where I am the spokesperson for the team. So good, bad or indifferent, I speak for the team at games time, and I'm happy to do that. What I'm really loving now is having the opportunity to be the facilitator for the athletes to tell their story as they get selected and they make the team, and be a part of that really positive moment where they become an Australian Olympian.
There's plenty of pressure associated, though, with an Olympic Games, which is quite unique. I would imagine as a former athlete, a former champion athlete, it gives you a greater understanding of the pressures faced by athletes too.
Yeah. And what I have really enjoyed is being able to provide that perspective to the staff here as well that I'm working with at the AOC, but also appreciating that I didn't know a lot of things when I came into this behind the scenes role. The pressure is immense. You can talk about pressure about expectation, stress, anxiety, hope. Hope is a big one that can add to the feeling of pressure. And the sheer notion of this, there's just no guarantee at the end of the day. And the shift between psychological pressures too, from that rookie that I was in Athens 2004 to ultimately that matriarchal figure in 2016, those pressures shift. I go from loving trying to win and then in some ways fearing what happens when I don't. So I feel like I have an appreciation for it, for the athletes that are there, and I can bring that lens into the work that I'm doing now behind the scenes. But at the same time, 8 years has passed since I've been an athlete, and there are a lot of changes. But in terms of pressure, I think I have some good understanding.
One thing I have noticed at the Olympic Games is the need to create a familiar environment. How have you done this for Paris? What have you done to make it familiar for the athletes?
Yeah, well, the Games is a really abnormal environment, isn't it? So what you can bring in that normalises it as much as possible for the athletes is important. Little things like a taste from home in the pantry, in the food pantry we're offering to athletes is things like Weet-Bix, Vegemite, yoga pouches, things that are familiar. Athletes will have spent already weeks, if not months, overseas in preparation on training camps, doing competitions leading into the Olympic Games. So when they get a little sense of familiarity and normal, it really warms the heart and boosts the morale. And just making the space of accommodation in the village and the sub-sites and the satellite villages that home away from home, where they feel safe to be able to switch off, because switching off is as important as switching on, and conserving energy where possible.
What sort of message are you able to give athletes? You mentioned there your experience, the fact that you're going to be pretty thinly spread across the ground. What messages are you going to be able to deliver to athletes to, I guess, make them feel comfortable in the first place, but strive for higher honours to another extent? How do you do that?
Oh, for me, it's just to expressly let them know that I'm there to support them. My job is to take as much shit off their plate as possible so that they can just go ahead and do what they are exceptional at doing, is getting the best out of themselves. And ultimately, if they don't see me much, that's a good thing, because they are relying with the normal people and the normal staff that they work with, and I will work with their staff as much as I can to minimise that interaction as possible. I'm not there for any other reason but to provide that support to the team. But I'm also open if people want to have a chat with me, if want to have a coffee, those sorts of things. That I want to be approachable if people want to approach me, but otherwise they can just go on and do what they know how to do best. Because
a third of the team are going to be away, aren't they, from the athlete village? So there are a lot of remote little villages right across France, but also in Tahiti. Is that going to be hard to manage, do you think, logistically? Yeah, it'll be probably the most spread a Games has been, and I'll heavily rely on my deputies in Mark Knowles, Kyle Vanderkuyt, Ken Wallace, Carly McCulloch and Bronwyn Knox to be able to help provide some leadership to our team. I really
am loving working with them. These are athletes who have all been exceptional in their sports and their disciplines, best in the country. Not all of them have won gold medals, not all of them have won medals. They cover everything from team sports to individual sports experience, with being a reserve, with being an Olympian, with winning and losing. And I think it's a great snapshot of what the team ultimately will be coming games time, but also on a results capacity as well. They get it. It's going to be a challenge. It will be a challenge, but at the same time, we're up for it. So,
how do you manage expectation? Because sometimes I have seen it myself from personal experience, whereby an athlete will win a silver medal and feel as though they're a failure, even though they've done incredibly well to win a silver medal, but their expectation was gold. How do you manage that expectation?
Yeah, it's a good question. Every athlete wants to win. That's why we're in competition, right? We want to win. We believe we're capable of winning, which is why it hurts so much when it doesn't happen. My message is, and what I'm really passionate about, is what is success for our athletes. Let's have that conversation before we even get to the competition field, right? For me, it's not a full stop at the end of gold medal. Success can be winning a silver, winning a bronze, making a final, performing a personal best, an act of sportsmanship, an act of sportswomanship, and success is making the team. There are a lot of people who don't get the opportunity to make the team to be an Australian Olympian. Why do I have this outlook and philosophy, and why do I talk to this? I came home from my 4th Games with a bronze medal, which I was so proud of, and it was so hard fought to earn that bronze medal. And a lot of people said to me, "We're sorry, you must be disappointed you didn't win gold." And I think we forget at times, maybe we've been spoiled in the past by some great acts of sportsmanship and sportswomanship, that we forget how hard it is to win, how many people are in the competition. And in doing so, we can devalue or discredit the achievement of a silver, of a bronze, of making a final, personal best, like I said before. So it's having those conversations and keeping it real, but also appreciating that expectation and hope is different for everyone.
Yes, you mentioned there the joy of winning bronze. I guess part of that was the journey that you'd been through with that horrific injury, and people amazed that you got back on the bike in the first place, but then to come away with a bronze medal. I think that was part of it, wasn't it?
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know that journey, that part of behind the scenes. It's easy to look at a race that's 10 seconds long or 2 hours long, or a period of different competitions to qualify through rounds. But this is a group of people who work hard on a 4-year cycle, and in some cases a whole lifetime behind the scenes for those 10 second, those moments that occur in 10 seconds, in 2 hours, and over a period of time. So like everything in life, there is a whole lot that happens behind the scenes that people don't realise, and that can affect how people see what that success looks like at the end of the day.
Before I talk about the fact that you do have to select the flag bearer, I wanted to ask you about the challenges in Paris. You've got the heat, you've got the traffic, you've got an atmosphere that is going to be second to none. There are a lot of challenges, aren't there, facing the Australians as they head across to Paris?
There's a lot of challenges, but that's my job and my team's job here at the AOC to minimise those challenges and work towards creating resolutions for them, so that the athletes and the sports and the teams don't have to worry about that. So I think it'll be a great games. Like any games, it'll have its challenges, that's fine, but we have a really experienced team that's capable of adjusting very quickly to circumstances as they arise, and we'll do that as each occasion arises.
Well, some of those circumstances, as you have briefly mentioned in the past, you've got the potential for athletes wanting to protest, you've got security, you've got a number of issues, I guess, that you have prepared for, but sometimes they're beyond your control.
Yeah, and there's no guarantee in anything, is there?
No.
But what you can put the guarantee in is the processes that you have in place and planned in preparation, just like all the athletes are doing with their plans and preparations to go out and compete. We have our plans and processes in place, and trust the application of that. And you give yourself the best chance of achieving the best outcome at the end with those processes and backing that in.
Now, you have carried the flag. It's a huge responsibility to select the person that carries the flag.
Yeah.
Does that weigh heavily on your shoulders?
Yeah, well, when that realization came to me, I was already well into this role, and just I don't know exactly how to explain it, like just the real happiness and excitement I felt that I have the opportunity to bestow this onto flag bearers for Paris. There'll be two, a male and a female, as there was in Tokyo. Because I remember what that moment was like for me when Kitty asked me to be the flag bearer. I know what that meant to me. I know what that felt like. And this will be a really life-changing experience for those athletes that I choose, with the support of the AOC team behind me, to carry that flag for Australia. And I'm looking forward to those moments.
You're the only Australian athlete to have won individual medals at 4 consecutive Olympic Games. And I guess, it was pretty obvious to people there that you were going to be the one that was going to be carrying the flag. What was it like?
Oh, that's nice. Thank you. What was the question?
What was it like to carry the flag?
Oh, I will never forget walking into the Maracana Stadium in Rio, behind Argentina, who we were having a singing contest in the tunnel to see which nation was louder. And then the little fleck of light at the end of that tunnel that got bigger and bigger and bigger as we got closer to entering the stadium. And then feeling the wall of noise and the wall of colour that came at us as Australia was announced into that stadium. And I realised then that I was leading a really respected nation on the sporting international stage. And I had my teammates behind me. And I will never forget that feel. I get goosebumps now just trying to recall it. I felt a little bit robbed because normally you get to walk a whole lap of the stadium, whereas in Rio they just walk straight across. So I felt like I had a short run at it. But for me, it changed my whole experience of my last Olympic campaign. It took the pressure off. It made me feel like my contribution to sport, and Olympic sport in particular in Australia, was recognised, and I was really grateful for that opportunity.
Now, I was at the Velodrome, London 2012, alongside Drew Morfitt, when you were having that incredible race in the sprint final with Victoria Pendleton. Was that the highlight, do you think, for you? Just that, the atmosphere, the anticipation, and the way that things turned out?
It's certainly one of the highlights. It's hard to go past, that's for sure. For the preparation and the execution, there was none better. My first gold in Athens was very similar, but it wasn't as strategic. My silver in Beijing after my accident, I put on the same level. It's like choosing between your children, really. Each medal has a story and an experience, and I'm reliving them in very simple forms now that I have a daughter and a son who are trying to piece together what mummy did and what mummy does and why these medals are here and what those stories are attached to them. So it's upon reflection and with time and perspective, outside of being an athletic Olympian, a competitive Olympian, I feel like I'm growing into being an Olympian, and I'm realising that follows me for life. Being an athlete is for a very short window of time, but being an Olympian follows me for life.
The Victoria Pendleton race, what made that special was that, of course, she was the hometown favourite, and you had to silence a very raucous crowd, amongst other things, to win that race. Yeah,
there was huge pressure, huge rivalry, and let's not forget, I probably had the worst race of my career a few days before and absolutely stuffing up the Keirin as world champion, which Pendleton won the gold in. So walking back into an environment where I felt I had failed the day before and then continuing to try and excel and succeed was really difficult. It took a lot of emotional toll and psychological toll, but I had a great support network and a great team behind me. We just backed the preparation. Yes, it was high pressure. Yes, it was high expectation. We had a plan, we backed it, and we took on the best in the world, and we were able to better the best in the world and become that number one. And it was a pretty amazing moment.
Let's talk about you as a leader now, and I guess you are a trailblazer to a certain degree. You mentioned there Petrea, the chef de mission for the Birmingham Commonwealth Games. You've got Kate with the Paralympics. There is a feeling that women are emerging as real leaders in sport. Is that the way that you feel at the moment? Do you feel as though, you're leading the way?
I just love this role. I'm grateful that Ian Chesterman saw in me a capacity to be a great leader for the Australian Olympic team. I'm grateful for Patria, who was the first female chef de mission for the Commonwealth Games for Australia, saw something in me to take her to work with her as a general manager, and across the board now to see women in the chef roles at Commonwealth Games, at Paralympics, and the Oz Olympic team is really special. And we have a great friendship and connection and support that we provide for each other. And what I have noticed is that even some of the athletes have come to me and said, just seeing you in this role makes me realise there's opportunity for me when I finish competing, and that's really nice to hear.
Have you found barriers over the years to try and get into these leadership roles? Do you feel as though it's easier now, or do you feel as though there still are barriers?
Well, sometimes the biggest barrier is experience, especially coming out from an extremely long athletic career. I was involved in the sport for 22 years, and 16 of those years were at the elite high performance level. And my experience was very much athlete-based, so it was hard to get experience outside of that in roles. And so I was very grateful when Patria offered me that opportunity, because I think it started the ball to roll, so to speak, for me to be where I am today.
Now, the big picture, what do you hope your legacy is going to be following the Olympic Games?
If I can shift the narrative and the pressure around what expectation and success is for our athletes, and build relationships between them, the media, and the public that follow our Australian Olympic team along, I would be really proud of that. I would be really proud to be able to help people see that behind the facade of an athlete, of a leader, of a coach, that there are people at the end of the day who experience exact same emotions and stresses as everybody else. And to just bring that level of pressure down a little bit.
Yes, they're seen as superhuman by many, but they're very vulnerable to a lot of extent. I guess we haven't seen too much of medal counts and medal predictions in the lead up to these games. I think the AOC's done a very good job in downplaying those expectations, because we used to have projected medal tables. I remember them well over the years, but we don't seem to have those anymore.
It's nice to feel like there's not a competition within the competition. There's enough pressure in trying to prepare for the biggest multi-sport competition in the world without feeling like you've got to fit somewhere on a medal tally. I would have really enjoyed the reprieve from that. And if you allow the athletes and the sports to have the scope to focus on that process, the outcome should look after itself. What I'm excited about for Paris is the breadth of sports that are showing great results leading into these games. So I'm looking forward to seeing all of them at their best capacity.
So finally, the big question, you've got how many baristas are going to these Olympic Games? Three baristas.
Three baristas.
Look, you're going to cop it from the French who say, well, listen, can't we make coffee? But you've got your own baristas.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because my first games I didn't go to was Tokyo, and when I saw some of the things that were put into the village, I was really surprised. And I asked the athletes when I got into this role, one of the biggest questions is the barista coming back? Is the barista coming back? I said, why was it important? And they said, well, because it was normal. We all have coffee and socialisation around having coffee or a cuppa or a tea or a hot chocolate now. And it created a space for them to be social outside of their own sports. So that's important to them. We'll put that in again.
Good on you. All the best, Anna. I'm sure you do a great job, but thanks very much for joining Onside with Sport Integrity
Pleasure.
Australia. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're listening to Onside, the official podcast of Sport Integrity Australia.
Well, Sarah Kenny is no stranger to Sport Integrity Australia. As the chair of our advisory council, Sarah is also an accomplished lawyer and World Sailing Vice President, and she joins us today. Sarah, you have a very wide skill set as a lawyer, as a high-level sports administrator, and as a former athlete. Are you able to mould them into one for the various roles that you have in sport?
Yes, I think, in a funny way, my entire career led me to, a role like this one with Sport Integrity Australia, being a lawyer by profession. integrity and proper practice and process is really at the heart of what you do day in, day out. And you have this sort of higher obligation as an officer of the court, which really, is quite different to a lot of careers. And I think, just like it was in my professional career, integrity is at the core of sport. So that background, as well as really seeing sport through from, a competitor level, through being a parent of athletes in pathway and Olympic programs, being on the board of an NSO, and then now on the governing body of an international federation, it gives you a fabulous perspective on sport. And you really need that with integrity matters, because they're pretty complex and the solutions are not, straightforward. So I think the broader your experience in sport and sort of aligned fields where integrity is at the core of the field, the better value you will contribute.
Just in terms of your role with World Sailing, is there a feeling, do you feel as though because you have this wide range that you're able to resonate with what is happening at the lower level, at the grassroots in your sport? Because that is one of the criticisms of management in sport, is that they don't really know what's going on at the bottom level. Do you feel as though you've got a good grasp of that because of your association with kids and people coming through the sport as well?
I think I absolutely got that from my role in Australia and the roles in Australian sailing. And also, though, from being a parent of kids involved, from, just beginners wanting to enjoy the sport through to, one of which is now in high performance sport. So I think it's quite hard if you don't have that experience, then suddenly being in an international federation or at that level, because you do need, I think, to have that broader understanding. Your members at the international level are the countries, the sports in each country. But you really have to understand most sports are challenged. We've got a common problem generally, which is that we've got very complex issues, a long list of priorities, and we don't have the resources, to do them all in the time frame we want to do them. And I think, having an understanding of just the pressures that, the national bodies are under, helps you when you're at the international level to, really think about how you're going to come up with rules, requirements, processes that not just are the right thing for the sport, but that our participants can actually engage with and deliver on and commit to.
Do you think younger sailors coming through have a real awareness of integrity issues in sport, whether it be gambling, anti-doping, abuse by coaches, etc.? Do you think that there is a greater understanding now of some of those integrity issues which may not have had that awareness in the past?
Look, I think there are, for a lot of reasons. Generally, the NSOs are much better equipped, much more aware, and they've got toolkits like the Sport Integrity, National Integrity Framework. They've got access to really good education products. I know, that the drug education is excellent. It becomes a prerequisite to enter into, the National Youth Championships at least. The unique thing about sailing too, I think, is we have a pretty complex set of racing rules. It's self-regulating largely to the extent that the competitors on the water have to determine whether or not, someone's done the wrong thing. And if they think they have, then they have to formally protest. It's a pretty challenging thing for young sports people in our sport to protest and then go through what's, a bit of an archaic process often. But we've softened that a bit with, more modern techniques and arbitration. So I think they might have a high degree of awareness about rules, and particularly with sailing, it's a sport where if you don't follow the rules, there's a real safety impact with collisions. And often we've got, young kids irresponsible of the helm of a boat. They really do need to understand the rules of the road. So I think, in general terms, there's a higher degree of awareness perhaps than in other sports because of that level of responsibility they have at a young age. But also I think, just the degree of education that's out there now, and they get a lot of that too in institutional programs within schools, that it certainly far exceeds anything that, was around when I was in that position where really it was non-existent.
Yes, I was just going to ask you about what it was like when you were coming through as a windsurfer. What was the education like back then in terms of anti-doping and some of the integrity issues that we've talked about?
I mean, the word that comes to mind is non-existent.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, yeah, I mean, we didn't have women's events in Olympic sailing at the time. I mean, I was lucky enough to do a demonstration event in windsurfing, but, you know, I really don't have a lot of recollection of anything around these topics from, you know, those decades ago. I mean, it was there, of course, in part, but it wasn't anywhere like what we have in sport today. We've come a long, long way in you know, those few short decades.
Just having a look at some of the issues that are facing sport integrity-wise now, what do you see as the main threats to the integrity of sport?
Anti-doping continues to be a major issue, and as we've seen, you know, it's not an exact science, and it's a constant challenge to stay ahead of the issues in that field. That won't go away. I think the challenge there, a lot is around the education, not just athlete education, the whole infrastructure, but also obviously on the science side, continually getting the science right and proper process right, and helping ensure that we keep sport clean. That the agency in Australia, we're pretty mature. Worldwide, we're pretty mature. So I guess, you know, relative to other integrity issues in sport, you know, there is a lot of investment, money, time that goes into those issues. And perhaps that's a distinction we can draw with the other integrity issues, which haven't had the same investment and infrastructure. And I think increasingly we're seeing those threats, the requirement for fair sport, the match fixing, corruption issues are continuing to emerge. And, you know, often they are at the lower levels of sport, so they can be even harder to identify and to address. The match fixing and those issues, the broader issues around advertising of gambling in sport, I think they're all very valid issues, but as well, just the whole safeguarding issue. It's a tricky issue. The well-being of athletes issues, they're all difficult issues to address when we're trying to achieve high performance. I think they will be big areas of focuses and continue to be, you know, real challenges for sport.
How important is your role, do you think, in terms of the context of Australian sport as the chair of Sport Integrity Australia? Because I'd imagine now you take a forensic approach to anything relating to integrity in sport where it may not have been that forensic before. Do you feel as though you're heavily invested in preserving Australian sport and the integrity of sport?
Yeah, look, I think the unique thing about the Advisory Council is, the agency itself is set up to provide a body that delivers a coordinated approach to addressing integrity threats and trying to keep sport safe. The council was created by the same Act of Parliament, and it was designed to provide advice. And importantly, we provide strategic advice. We don't get involved in individual cases or investigations. But where I found, you know, we've had the most impact is where we can help influence and inform in the early days of developing new policy, strategies, approaches, initiatives. The council is, you know, up to 10 people drawn from a very wide array of professional and sporting backgrounds. I know as diverse as law enforcement, child protection, lawyers. We have athletes who've come from very different backgrounds, and most have long years of experience in a couple of fields. And when we get the chance to talk about an issue early enough, the context and richness of the discussion, you know, is it's really inspiring. And the test for me of the value is when not just my fellow council members, but when David and his team from the agency say after a meeting, you know, that we have provided incredibly valuable insight and input and food for thought. And that's what we're there for. And I think it's what's needed because the issues are complex. As an agency, we're a groundbreaker and a trailblazer. There are not many like us. And these issues, a lot of them are new and evolving. And, you know, sport is complex because every sport is a little bit different and the issues manifest differently. So there's not always a one-size-fits-all solution. But I think with the power of this body of, you know, experienced people from all different backgrounds and experience, you know, we come up with, really interesting insight. And if that's given to the team early enough, where we can shape, we can, cut off, we can help direct where collectively we think the agency can make the most difference, then I think it will help influence outcomes and, much more efficiently and in a timely manner.
Because I would imagine you're in quite a unique position, all of you, on the Advisory Council, because you're in touch with the grassroots community to a certain extent, and they'd be asking you questions about integrity issues relating to sport, and you can feed those questions back to Sport Integrity Australia about what people are talking about, what people want to know about.
And that's the power, I think, of a body like that. It's there are a few other examples of it in other fields, but I think in sport, everyone relates to it and everyone wants to be engaged in it, and we want sport to be something that's accessible to everybody. So the broader, your leadership group is, your influence group, your advisory group, I think the better input you're going to have, because you're constantly getting feedback, as you describe, which helps educate and helps people think a bit more outside the box for, creative, but also more relevant, solutions. It's really not much good coming up with something that, is never going to be workable. And there have been occasions where, something's been presented heading in a particular direction, and due to, some specific experience and background, one of our council members has, offered some insight where, it actually changed the shape of that initiative.
Yeah. What about you as a person? Is it fascinating to you on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, to look at integrity issues relating to sport?
Look, it is. It's something that I'm fascinated by, but also, I'm passionate about, because I think integrity is at the core of a strong culture, whether that's in sport or otherwise. I've very much been of the school of, it's not just what you say, it's actually doing what you say. And I think that can be quite hard sometimes in sport. You can have all the integrity policies, processes, procedures in place, but unless you're actually delivering on them, they're just words on a page. So I think we still have quite a few challenges in terms of breaking down some of the traditional boundaries in sport. And, there's a big role that we can play in having people out there who are advocates for integrity, and who've just, seen enough, I guess, in sport and other walks of life, that you can make some of these discussions a bit more real and meaningful, and help change sport for the better for everyone. And that's at every level, whether it's, grassroots and trying to encourage participation, or whether it's retention and ultimately, success at the highest levels.
And because your opinion holds such gravitas, I'd imagine that in a community setting, you've almost got to be careful about what you say, because it can be deemed almost as policy. And, this is what Australia's going to be doing.
Yeah, look, and again, key, the council operates as a body. It's not me or any individual's view. It's a collective view and input. And, we give advice to the minister and to the CEO. So, yeah, I mean, you won't see me, in the media commenting on this stuff very often, if at all.
Yes. And just looking at, I guess, your career in law, you've had a very extensive career in law after graduating from Sydney University. Is that a real passion for you, law and combining it with sport to a certain extent?
Yeah, look, I was pretty lucky there. Never in my wildest dreams would I have thought that I'd been able to combine, law and sport quite literally. Although I was a corporate lawyer for much of my career, I was fortunate in my second year at Herbert Smith Freehills that I worked with the then honorary solicitor of what was then the Australian Rugby Union, now Rugby Australia. And I worked with him on, an amazing array of matters, including drafting the first drug policy for the Rugby Union. Some years later, I was told that when we presented that policy, I was actually the first female ever to present to a council meeting in rugby in Australia. So that really got me interested in sport and the law. And, it wasn't a full-time practice, but it was an adjunct practice. And, I was involved in the initial group of people that set up ANZLA, the Australian New Zealand Sports Law Association, and worked on the two of the early conferences. So started to become part of a network of people who were sort of applying, law to sport. And then just over the years, where the matter was big enough that, they were interested in using a firm the size of Freehills, I've had an amazing opportunity to work on matters, including, in the adding teams to the NRL, the first privatisation of the Swans. I did the privatisation of the Knights in the NRL. For 5 years leading up to the Olympics, I pretty much worked full-time on matters relating to the Olympic Games, working for everybody but the organising committee. Did a huge amount of work on all the infrastructure, including the stadium. And I will never forget the day we went to that NRL doubleheader with 100,000 people for the opening of that stadium. It was really probably one of the absolute highlights of my career in sport, just seeing the output of, an enormous amount of blood, sweat and tears and a huge amount of pressure. There's nothing like an Olympic Games deadline for pressure in sport. And then since then, continued to do work in sport and, of course, then the admin roles outside of sport. So I think, it's kept my career in the law long because I've been able to do these, really interesting matters in sport.
No, you've had a great career. I just wanted to find out as a last question, before you became the chair of Sport Integrity Australia's Advisory Council, did you have an awareness of Sport Integrity Australia and before that ASADA?
Yeah, obviously on the doping anti-doping function was, everyone was well aware of it. I'd been following the Wood Royal Commission and then the recommendations that came out of that. But I think, it sort of suddenly leapt out and was there and operating. And we didn't come into, or we weren't appointed until a little bit after that. So I think it's taken generally people a little bit longer to understand what Sport Integrity Australia is and the extensiveness of its functions. And obviously most people are familiar with the anti-doping and that tends to get, a lot of the media attention. But the awareness, I think, now is tenfold, through just that concerted effort of, what you do and your team and David and the team do with that constant stream of, education about these issues, all bettering sport.
And so you obviously enjoy the role and you enjoy being associated with Sport Integrity Australia, so that's great. Sarah, thanks very much for joining us on Onside today. It's been fascinating just to find out, I guess, a bit about your background, but also your passion for sport and law. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Been my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Onside. I'm Tim Gavel, and in the build-up to the Paris Olympics and Paralympics, we'll be back soon with another episode of Onside.
You've been listening to Onside, the official podcast of Sport Integrity Australia. Send in your podcast questions or suggestions to media@sportintegrity.gov.au. For more information on Sport Integrity Australia, please visit our website www.sportintegrity.gov.au or check out our Clean Sport app.